I was born May the 14th, 1932. I was evidently conceived in New York. I was born at Phoebe Putney Hospital. I was a large baby. I think I weighed over 9 pounds. I was born right in the middle of the Depression, and they lived through it. And the only thing I can remember is I can remember some beggars coming to our door, my mother feeding them. I remember the first time I saw someone whose skin was yellow, my mother explaining to me he had yellow jaundice. I grew up kind of feeling as though I had a silver spoon in my mouth. We had hands on the place, we had ponies, we had horses, we had cows. He lived in this big house that burned down. Then he rebuilt. I can vaguely remember being among the ashes in the house. I must have been about 3 years old. Maybe only two and a half, but I can just very vaguely remember it being there. And then they rebuilt the house in the same location, and we lived maybe a mile from the house. But I can remember as a little boy waking up and maybe I'd go get in bed with my parents. We all got in bed together a lot. It was a wonderful sort of loving environment. But I can remember my granddaddy riding the horses up and standing outside the window, and my talking to him out the window as a little boy. And so horses were very much a part of it. And he trained registered Tennessee walking horses. So I can remember as a little kid going over to Shelbyville, Tennessee, which was the center of the Tennessee walking horse area, to shows and stuff like that. I grew up showing horses. It was just a part of my life. I never thought about it one way or the other. He evidently had some financial problems, and he had all this land that was close to town where the big house was on. And he sold it or traded it or did something. Maybe he just wanted to move out from town, but he moved out on a much bigger piece of property 10 miles out from town. And so I must have been maybe 6 or 7 or 5 when they moved out there. And this Dr. Grace took over the land that he had. And everybody thinks of it being the Grace home, but it's not. It was a Shumway home. And that always hurt my mother, that the prominent place where her parents had built became known as the Grace property. And our pasture, and I can remember riding in that pasture as a little kid on my pony, which was named Beauty. He planted pines in it, and that became some of the prestige real estate in the area. But they had already moved out, and he moved out 10 miles out from town, on out the Dawson Road, which is on out past the farm he had. If I wasn't in school, he would take me out there, and I would stay out there with him. And I can remember that they had redone an old farmhouse that was out there. I can remember so much about that because it was such a predominant part of my life. My daddy still worked for my granddaddy, and they had cows on the place. Got a dairy there, a big dairy, and had a dairy in town. My daddy ran the dairy in town. B was the cook, and B would come in early in the morning, and she would cook breakfast, and my granddaddy would get me up. But even before then, there were probably 10 or 15 families that lived on the place. There were hands. And I can remember that there was a big bell, like a big church bell, that was up in the top of an oak tree. And so about daybreak, they would ring the bell. And that was for everybody to get up. And so I can remember waking up to the bell. It'd still be dark. And then it must have been maybe 30 minutes later, I can remember hearing the blacks putting the harnesses on the mules. And when you put the harness on them, there was a clanking of the yokes and stuff you put on the mules, and then they'd go out in the field. Okay, then I would get up, and my granddad would have already been out, and B would have cooked me grits and eggs and biscuits and stuff like that. And so, and my grandmother would join us. And then I would go out, and my granddad would say, "Come on, Bobby." And I'd get on my pony, he'd get on his horse, and we would ride the land, and he'd be checking on the work, the fields and stuff like that. and I would just tag along with him. I can remember later that he would carry a pistol with him, and so he would show me how to shoot the pistol. So I was shooting the pistol. During the summertime, I went barefooted all the time. I can remember the first day in which Tutu would say, "Okay, Bobby, you can go without your shoes on." And I can remember running through the grass barefooted, and it was usually probably the early part of May. And except for going to church and going to things like that, I was barefooted and going to school. I was barefooted all summer long. All the kids were. And our feet got so tough. I can remember that my mother used to stay after me about coming in and washing my feet. And so I learned a quick way to wash my feet. I would stand up in the john and flush it. And so that was the way in which I would wash my feet. Just rub them and flush it several times to wash my feet. It was a very, very predominant part of my life. A lot that I have wonderful memories of the farm and the freedom that went along with it. That was the kind of life I lived. We had a creek there, and I'd go swimming in the creek. I was free to do anything I wanted to. I got on my pony, go anywhere I wanted to go, do anything I wanted to do. It was a wonderful sort of childhood to grow up on. As a little kid, I mean, we played cops and robbers, and the big deal was going to the movie on Saturday. We had Hopalong Cassidy and Gene Autry and Bob Steele and all of these, the Saturday afternoon idols. My mother would give me 15 cents to go to the movie. It cost me a dime to get in, and about $5 worth, a nickel worth of candy. I could ride my bicycle downtown. It was probably 3 miles downtown, but I'd take off riding my bicycle down and go to the movie every Saturday. I'd gotten so I was in the 3rd grade, and I had ridden off on this horse named Pat. I was an accomplished rider. I could ride anything, and so I remember I had been out riding maybe a mile from the place, and there was 2 barns, and so something spooked Pat, and I can remember her running with me. I can remember horses running away with me all the time, but like my granddaddy always said, "Bobby, can't you ride as long as a horse can run?" And so I would, but I remember I would just own the horse, and I can remember the horse running back towards the barns. And I don't remember anything else, because what happened was that the Pat came running through the barn, and one of the black hands came up and waved her to stop, and she bolted, and I fell over the top of the horse, and the horse ran up and hit me in the head and knocked me unconscious. And they didn't know what to do, so they picked me up, put me in the car, took me into the dairy, which was 10 miles away in town. And they've told me this story, and so when the hands brought me in to the dairy, to my daddy's office, and he saw me there laying limp, and he fainted. He thought I was dead. Well, I went to the hospital, stayed in the hospital 3 days, and I was out for probably, I don't know, maybe the rest of the day or something like that. They've always laughed, that's what's wrong with my brain, is it got hit in the head with a horse. We had an ice box. That was before refrigerators. And so they would bring a block of ice. And I can remember the iceman bringing the block of ice and putting it in an ice box. And I signed my name on one of those as a receipt for the ice. My mother saved it. I just remember being a pink slip and scribbling on there, B-O-B-B-Y. But I don't remember anything else. But we lived there till I was 5. My brother was born. He was 1 year old when we moved, and we moved on into town then. I have a younger brother who was 4 years younger than I am. In my recollection, he was never quite the star of the family that I was. And I think it scarred him. If he was here having an interview, he might not say so. He used to say I was the shittiest big brother God ever made. And I probably was. I mean, he was just a 4 years difference. He was just a nuisance to me. He was just always a nuisance. He's a wonderful individual. He's been highly successful in business. He lives down in Florida now. But we were never really close growing up, primarily because of me. He wanted to, and if he sees this, he's going to probably say, yeah, I remember all that. My father was redhead, had red curly hair. My younger brother was born, he had red curly hair. Originally, his name was Kerry Culbertson. I don't know where the name Kerry came from. But as he got older, everyone called him Little Dooley. My daddy's nickname was Dooley. His real name was Ewell. Ewell Robert was his real name. But I never could get a straight answer from him as to where the nickname Dooley came from, because I can look in his college annual at Georgia Tech, and he was called Dooley. And so he was always known as Dooley. I had heard some story about he was smit with some little girl in junior high, and her name was Dooley, and they started teasing him. I've heard that story, but I don't know where the truth comes from. I have no idea where the name Dooley comes from, D-O-O-L-E-Y. So, my brother comes along, and everybody calls him Little Dooley. When he is 5 years old, my daddy comes home one day, and he says, I'm not going to have that boy grow up being named one thing and called something else like I have. I'm going to change his name to Dooley. So my brother's real name is Dooley Ewell Culbertson. And so maybe he's named after some girlfriend my daddy had at junior high, but that's his name. And he loves the name Dooley because everybody can remember the name Dooley. When Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th, 1941, so I was not yet 9 years old, I was 8 years old. Right outside of Albany was a place called Dar Air Force Base. And it was a little small Air Force base, and they brought the British pilots over there to be trained. And I remember that they flew these old bow-winged planes with open cockpit. And I remember they used to touch down in our pasture, and I'd see them come down and land at our pasture and then take back off. And most of them were Episcopalians, so they'd go to the Episcopal Church. And we adopted one. We adopted two of them. One of them was killed in the war. But I just remember their coming to our house and the war taking place. And then during World War II, I remember the rationing. My daddy he was 35 when it started, and they were not drafting 35-year-olds at that particular time. And so he did not get drafted, but he joined the National Guard, or the Home Guard, whatever it was called. And I remember that he used to drill. He was a sergeant, and he would drill, and every so often they'd go out and defend and guard the radio tower. But one other thing I remember about my daddy is that he was thrown from a horse before I remember it, and he broke his little finger. So his little right finger would bend like this. It grew back strong because it never set it. So whenever he would salute with the finger like that. We used to all laugh at him. Each summer, my parents would send me to Greenville YMCA camp. And that was a big event, going up to the Greenville YMCA camp. And there was a guy there who directed it by the name of Monk Mulligan. And Monk was a kind of an icon in that area, a wonderful guy. And my daddy had gone to camp with Monk when Monk was first there with the Greenville YMCA. My daddy was big in the YMCA. As a consequence, I'm still a member of the Y, go there regularly. But so my daddy went, and then I went. And then before Monk died, he was still at the camp, and my oldest son, Ewell, went there also. So they had pictures of us, of the three generations that had gone to camp under Monk Mulligan. Back then, they harvest peanuts, which was a big crop for us, differently than they do it now. The hands would go out, and they would shake the peanuts. You'd take them and you'd shake them, and then you would stack them, and you'd make this stack of peanuts. I remember, where they would dry out, they'd dry out them, and then they would process them. And I remember one time, I must have been 14, something like that. And my granddad said, well, Bobby, why don't you get a job? We pay you 25 cents a stack for stacking those peanuts. And I thought that was a good idea. So I went out with the blacks to stack peanuts. I lasted a half a day. And they teased me, the blacks teased me about it. They said, yeah, Bobby, you can't take it, can you? But I was totally exhausted. I mean, I was covered with old red mud and stuff like that. But it showed me up, and I was very humble going back to the house to see my grandmother. I have a lot of empathy for the injustices that were done against blacks. My granddaddy slept every night of his life that I knew of with a pistol under his pillow. And I can remember them training dogs to attack blacks. And I can get emotional about it. I remember one afternoon, I must have been 15, 14, something like that. And we were driving out, I guess going to the farm. And there was a car pulled over on the side of the road. And there was a black man there bleeding. I remember I was stopping, and this farmer had gotten off the truck. He was on a tractor there. I'm going to say it the way it was said. And so he came over there, and he knew my daddy. Everybody called him Mr. Dooley. He said, Mr. Dooley, this damn nigger was over here, and he got drunk driving this big fancy car. And I could tell he was drunk, and he said, I really worked him over with a Coca-Cola bottle. Well, the true story was that black man was the only black doctor in town. And that he had had an apoplectic fit. He had had epilepsy. And that farmer had taken it on his own to beat him up with a Coca-Cola bottle. He was all cut up and all blood all over. But nothing was ever done to him. But I remember that. I remember that very, very clearly. And those are scars. We always had jobs. I think most all kids did. Before I could drive, I used to work in the commissary out at the farm. I worked out at Radium Springs, which was the kind of place where everybody went to swim, which was a wonderful place. It's closed down now. I can remember working out there behind the counter, serving things. All through high school, though, on the weekends, I worked washing cars at the Julius Benton car wash. Washed a car for $1 a wash. And that was always, I would go to work. I remember I'd work 10 hours a day and get $5. I'd go to work at 7 in the morning and get off at 5. And we'd wash cars every Saturday. Then in the summertime, I used to measure cropland. So I always have been a hard worker. That's just the way I was brought up. It's interesting now that as I listen to jazz songs and things like that, they're mostly all things that we grew up with. Like, I remember when Frank Sinatra was on the hit parade. And every Saturday night I go up to my friend Jackie Hoggebuck's house, who lived right up the street from me. And we used to lay around and listen to the Frank Sinatra and the hit parade, because they would always have the hit parade, and then it was the #1 song of the day, stuff like that. But there were only 2 radio stations. I mean, none of this, and certainly no television.